we will rejoice. Before I get into the text this morning, I want to share with you a moment of learning with some of the background and history of the city of Philippi and its church there. It's a fascinating history. And I'm going to ask to see if we can get up. There we go. And you can go to the next one. The city and church in Philippi, and one more. Okay, that's a map, and you see the red arrow up there pointing to the city of Philippi. And on that same level, you'll see all the way to Byzantium, which would be Constantinople, and all the way on the other side, Thessalonica, or the city of Thessalonian, where Paul also founded a church. This city, founded in the 4th century before Christ, was a region rich with gold and silver mines. The settlement that would become known as Philippi was originally named Krenides in Greek, which means fountains. There was obviously an abundance of fresh water. And within a few years, however, Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, in 356 BC, renamed the city after himself. He called it Philippi, a name which has remained to this day 2,375 years later. In the year 42 before Christ, BC, Julius Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, remember Cassius's famous speech? Those of you who took Latin, you had to read that speech in Latin. Or some of us did. We tried to. Brutus and Cassius were defeated in a battle just outside the city of Philippi. After that war, Philippi was designated a Roman colony, which encouraged a huge migration of people from Rome and other parts of Italy to move to the city, because in Philippi they had the same rights and privileges as they had in Rome. In fact, there were many soldiers and officers from the Roman Praetorian Guard who retired to the city because of its location, its commerce, and its pleasant weather. Here's a slide of what the city looked like if you had taken a picture of it from a drone. You have no idea how hard it was to find that. Up at the very top was what was called the Acropolis, and it was a center of learning and worship for many, many different gods. By the time that Paul and Silas planted the church in Philippi around 49 AD, the city was populated with a variety of folks from all over the empire, including Romans and Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, and Thracians. Scholars have estimated that the population at that time was about 10,000 inhabitants. The Roman colony of Philippi, and it had the name Colonia Augusto Julio Philippensis in Latin, became a strategically important city in Macedonia, located on a highway leading from the eastern provinces all the way to Rome, the Egnatia Road. This road ran along the north side of the city's forum and was the chief cause of its prosperity and political importance. The Egnatian Way was like an interstate highway running east-west. It enabled Philippi to become the central city in northern Greece with commercial activity and trading in both goods and cultures. And with the international population located there, Philippi also became a major religious center, including the worship of Greek and Roman gods and goddesses, as well as foreign gods from Asia Minor and Egypt. There were at least 35 different deities worshipped in Philippi, as well as emperor worship, because Philippi was a Roman colony. It was into this confused religious milieu that Paul and Silas and Timothy and the chronicler Luke carried the light of the gospel during Paul's second missionary journey. While the team was in Troas, Paul had a vision of a man, and Troas is at the bottom of that arrow. While they were there, you may recall from Acts, I think at the 16th chapter, Paul had a vision of a man calling out to him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." In response, they traveled by sea to Neapolis, a port just 10 miles from Philippi. And in Acts 16, Luke describes Philippi as, quote, "the leading city of the district of Macedonia, a Roman colony." The first convert to Christ in Philippi was Lydia. She was a businesswoman who sold purple fabric. From her house, Paul continued to add to this fledgling church. And you will recall that after a brief episode of imprisonment in Philippi that resulted in a jailer's conversion, the local authorities forced the preacher, Paul, and Silas to leave the city, but not before Paul provided encouragement to the newly planted church that was meeting in Lydia's home. Ruins of the theater, the Acropolis, the Forum, the Baths, and the commemorative arch, about a mile west of the city, have been found. You can show the next slide. There we go. A little farther beyond the arch is the Gangitis River, and it's probably the place Paul addressed some God-fearing women and where Lydia was converted and baptized. Go to the next one. Yes, in fact, this is a current photo. Christian groups have come and built that little amphitheater, and there is a section as this river or creek runs through, and that's probably where she was baptized. So, what happened to the church in Philippi? What is its history? We do know that it was at that same church in Philippi which received a letter from Polycarp, the famous bishop of Smyrna, around AD 110, in which Polycarp wrote, go to the next, there we go, and one more. This is what he wrote: "The secure root of your faith, being proclaimed from ancient times, still continues and bears fruit to our Lord Jesus Christ." How encouraging to know that Paul's efforts had not been in vain. That was approximately 61 years after the church was planted. Through letters of the church fathers and recent excavations, there is evidence that a Christian presence tied to that original church plant in Philippi continued to flourish for centuries. Between the mid-4th century and the end of the 6th, 7 different churches were built. Next slide, please. Some of which competed in size and decoration with the most beautiful buildings in Constantinople, including the Hagia Sophia and St. Irene's Basilica. This is what you could see if you went to Philippi today. You see the remnants of this huge cathedral or basilica. Basilica B in Philippi is one example of such magnificent structures. You can go on. Here you see just a tiny portion of a wall remaining of that basilica. Now, the city was almost totally destroyed by an earthquake in 619. It was then rebuilt, then became an important city as part of the Byzantine Empire. The churches in Philippi struggled for several centuries until their lights were dimmed when Muslim forces flooded the region in the late medieval period. So there was a witness for Christ up until about the 1300s. Now, isn't your life richer and fuller? Here ends the moment of learning. I hope it doesn't stop as I preach.